God has a habit of picking the most unlikely people to do God's work. I mean, just think about this. God's choice wouldn't even get to the stage of an interview in our world. Abraham, he'd have been knocked out of the running at the get-go. 75 years old, applying for this job? Are you kidding me? Aren't you on Social Security? Aren't you retired by now? No. Moses, speech impediment, had to have his brother with him all the time to do all the talking, and he was a felon on the run. Don't forget that part. Gideon, a distinct lack of courage. Rahab, she ran a brothel. What kind of job experience is that? Leah, so short-sighted she squinted. Jacob was a cheater. David, an adulterer and a murderer. Poor Elijah had to have suffered from clinical depression. Jonah ran away from God. Isaiah, believe it or not, preached naked one time. Can't have been pretty. John the Baptist ate bugs. Martha was a compulsive worrier. Paul kept getting arrested, and Peter just collapsed under pressure. These are good things to remember when we feel that God could not possibly have chosen us to do anything. In our reading today, it was still early in Jesus' ministry. He was getting a name for himself. People were paying attention to this prophet who not only taught, but he actually healed. But he didn't yet have the 12 with him. Some of them knew who he was. He certainly knew who they were. But that call and response hadn't happened yet until that fateful day when Jesus came to the lakeside to teach. As the crowds gathered around, it was probably becoming difficult for people to hear. And so Jesus did the logical thing. He commandeered a boat. There were 2 boats by the lake. The fishermen who owned these boats were cleaning their nets for the day after a very long, fruitless night of fishing. They were getting everything in order to pack it away. It was a hard enough life when you did manage to catch something. Those times when you came up empty-handed were very, very discouraging. Jesus would have known this, but he still asked Peter, the tired and aching Simon Peter, to put his boat out a little bit from the shore so that he could use it to teach. Hills surrounded the Sea of Galilee. It made a perfect amphitheater that carried sound, so that when he was on the water, everyone could hear him. It was a perfect place. And so, despite the fact that he was probably just exhausted, Simon Peter obliged, and he did as he was asked. Jesus sat and taught the multitudes from the boat. And guess what? We have absolutely no idea what he said that day. Isn't that fascinating? That is not remembered at all, because what came next overshadowed everything. When Jesus had finished teaching, he asked Simon Peter to put out into the deep and let down his nets for a catch. Now, Peter, his brother, and their friends, they were experienced fishermen. They had been fishing all night. They knew darn good and well that there were no fish out there. What Jesus was asking them to do was ridiculous. And furthermore, it was going to make more work for them, because they were going to have to clean the nets all over again. We can almost imagine the internal argument going on in Simon Peter's head. But something about this teacher got to him. "Master," he said, "we have worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will put down the nets." Common sense told Peter it was a waste of time. But he did it anyway. Peter and the others lowered the nets, and before they knew what hit them, the nets were bursting with fish. There were so many fish, they called to the other boats to help. There were so many fish, the boats couldn't even hold them all without sinking. Don't you just love it when God makes a point? We might think, ordinarily speaking, that Simon Peter would have been whooping it up all night, and then this, the best catch of his life? If he had been a different type of man, he would have been. If he had been a different type of man, he may have been thinking how to capitalize on his new friendship with this extraordinary prophet. But if he were a different type of man, Jesus would not have chosen him. Instead, Simon Peter recognized the hand of God at work. He was overcome with a sense of his own unworthiness and frailty. He knew he couldn't begin to match up to this. So he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." But Jesus did not go away. Instead, Jesus called him to be his disciple. Jesus told him not to be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. And so rather than personally profiting from this overabundant catch, Peter and his brother pulled the boats up on shore and left everything to follow Jesus. Now, of course, you know, I'm always very conscious of waste, so I'm thinking, all those fish? But we don't need to be concerned that they went to waste. In this economy, everyone in the village would have eaten very well that night. No fish would have been left rotting on the beach. It is very uncomfortable to feel exposed and to suddenly realize that you are standing in the presence of the divine is to feel supremely exposed. Peter and his brother Andrew, along with James and John, they were just ordinary fishermen. They weren't scholars. They didn't study the Torah all day. They had to go to work. These were hard-working, earthy men. They sweat. They swore. They had wives and girlfriends. They probably did the equivalent of going out for a pint with the guys. They were under no illusions that they were perfect. That holy stuff, that was for holy people, you know, the professional ones. And then this Jesus comes along and he turns everything on its head. "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man," Peter pleaded. As if Jesus didn't know. As if Jesus couldn't see right through into his soul. It's a bit terrifying being fully known like that. And if anyone felt unprepared, it was Peter. Now, most of us have had that dream. You know the one. It's a manifestation of what I call post-traumatic school disorder, which is generally a lifelong condition. Doesn't matter how old you get. In the dream, you suddenly realize that you have a test for a course that for some reason you have never attended. maybe you did a few in the beginning and then mysteriously forgot to go back. For me, it's always math.
Right.
History? Physics? All of the above? That feeling of total panic rises up. Oh no, what am I going to do? I have to take a test on something I know nothing about. And then, mercifully, you wake up. But Peter did not wake up. And he was terrified. He knew that he was totally unprepared and totally unqualified. Somehow or other, Jesus had got the wrong guy. Depart from me, Lord. I'm a screw up. Don't you know that? There's nothing holy about me. I make mistakes all the time. Peter probably felt like that guy who turns up for a party in jeans and a t-shirt thinking it's a barbecue and finding out it's black tie. He couldn't wait to get out of there. But Jesus knew. Jesus knew Peter. He knew his big heart. He knew his impetuous nature. He knew his deep humility. Jesus does not call us because we are perfect. He calls us because we know we're not perfect. If there was a test for Peter to pass, it was whether or not he was willing to set aside his own exasperation and pride and do what Jesus asked him to do by letting down the nets. Peter obeyed, and the rest is history. When we interview people for jobs, we expect resumes that boast of accomplishments. We hire someone who says, yes, I can do this job, no doubt about it. But when God calls people, it's rather the opposite. Because the person who says, I can do this, I'm up to the task, is relying on their own strength, and they're just going to get in the way. They will fail. But the one who feels supremely unqualified, who is humble, will receive power and wisdom at the time it is needed. When God called the prophet Isaiah, he cried, woe to me, I am undone, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for I have seen the King, Yahweh, God of armies. Because he was acutely aware of his own lack, God equipped Isaiah to serve. It may be counterintuitive for us, but the more we acknowledge our weakness before God, the greater our power will be in serving God. God can only fill us to the degree that we're open, that we're aware of our need, and allow ourselves to be opened. If I'm full of myself, there's no room. God doesn't wait for us to feel strong and capable. Strong and capable is an illusion. God calls us in our weakness, in our busyness, right in the middle of life. We may not have that kind of intense spiritual experience that Peter did that day. Mountaintop experiences occur rarely in life because we could not endure them. To be aware of God's presence in such a deep way shakes us to our core. But in reality, whether we're aware of it or not, we are always exposed to God. God always knows all about us. Everything, even the things we think we're hiding from God. God's not fooled. God knows. So we might as well stop fighting it. Let it down, let it go, and let God move in our lives. God calls us to serve, not because we think we can, but because we know that without God's strength, we definitely can't. Amen.
Amen.